So here's a prediction. If we get our cities right, we just might survive the 21st century. If we get them wrong, and we're done for. Cities are the most extraordinary experiment in social engineering that we humans have ever come up with. If you live in a city, and even if you live in a slum, which 20% of the world's urban population does, you're likely to be healthier, wealthier, better educated, and live longer than your country cousins. There's a reason why 3 million people are moving to cities every single week. Cities are where the future happens first. They're open, they're creative, they're dynamic, they're democratic, they're cosmopolitan, they're sexy. They're the perfect antidote to reactionary nationalism. But cities have a dark side. They take up just 3% of the world's surface area, but they account for more than 75% of our energy consumption, and they emit 80% of our greenhouse gases. There are hundreds of thousands of people who die in our cities every single year from violence, and millions more who are killed as a result of car accidents and pollution. In Brazil, where I live, we've got 25 of the 50 most homicidal cities on the planet, and a quarter of our cities have chronic water shortages, and this in a country with 20% of the known water reserves. So cities are dual-edged. Part of the problem is that apart from a handful of megacities in the West and the Far East, we don't know that much about the thousands of cities in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia, where 90% of all future population growth is set to take place. So why this knowledge gap? Well, part of the problem is that we still see the world through the lens of nation states. We're still locked in a 17th century paradigm of parochial national sovereignty. And yet in the 1600s, when nation states were really coming into their own, less than 1% of the world's population resided in a city. Today, it's 54%. By 2050, it'll be closer to 70%. So the world has changed. We have these 193 nation states, but we have easily as many cities that are beginning to rival them in power and influence. Just look at New York. The Big Apple has 8.5 million people and an annual budget of $80 billion. Its GDP is 1.5 trillion, which puts it higher than Argentina, than Australia, Nigeria, and South Africa. Its roughly 40,000 police officers means that it has one of the largest police departments in the world, rivaling all of the largest nation states. But cities like New York, or Sao Paulo, or Johannesburg, or Dhaka, or Shanghai, they're punching above their weight economically, but below their weight politically. And that's going to have to change. Cities are going to have to find their political voice if they want to change things. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the risks that cities are facing, some of the big mega risks. I'm also going to talk to you briefly about some of the solutions. And I'm going to do this using a big data visualization that was developed with Carnegie Mellon's Create Lab and my institute, along with many, many others. And I want you to first imagine a world not as made up of nation states, but as made up of cities. What you see here is every single city with a population of 250,000 people or more. Now, without going into technical detail, the redder the circle, the more fragile that city is, and the bluer the circle, the more resilient. Fragility occurs when the social contract comes unstuck. And what you tend to see is a convergence of multiple kinds of risks: income inequality, poverty, youth unemployment, different issues around violence, even exposure to droughts, cyclones, and earthquakes. Now, obviously some cities are more fragile than others. The good news, if there is any, is that fragility is not a permanent condition. Some cities that were once the most fragile cities in the world, like Bogota in Colombia or Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, have now fallen more around the national average. The bad news is that fragility is deepening, especially in those parts of the world that are most vulnerable, in North Africa, the Middle East, in South Asia and Central Asia. There we're seeing fragility rising way beyond scales we've ever seen before. Now, when cities become too fragile, they can collapse, tip over, and fail. And when that happens, we have explosive forms of migration. Refugees. There are more than 22 million refugees in the world today. more than at any other time since the Second World War. Now, there's not one refugee crisis. There are multiple refugee crises. And contrary to what you might read in the news, the vast majority of refugees aren't fleeing from poor countries to wealthy countries. They're moving from poor cities into even poorer cities, often cities nearby. Now, every single dot on this map represents an agonizing story of struggle and survival. But I want to briefly tell you about what's not on that map, and that's internal displacement. There are more than 36 million people who've been internally displaced around the world. These are people living in refugee-like conditions, but lacking the equivalent international protection and assistance. And to understand their plight, I want to zoom in briefly on Syria. Syria suffered one of the worst droughts in its history between 2007 and 2010. More than 75% of its agriculture, 85% of its livestock were wiped out. And in the process, over 1 million people moved into cities like Aleppo, Damascus, and Homs. As food prices began to rise, you also had equivalent levels of social unrest. And when the regime of President Assad began cracking down, you had an explosion of refugees. You also had over 6 million internally displaced people, many of whom went on to become refugees. And they didn't just move to neighboring countries like Jordan, or Lebanon, or Turkey. They also moved up north towards Western Europe. See, over 1.4 million Syrians made the perilous journey to the Mediterranean and up through Turkey to find their way into two countries primarily, Germany and Sweden. Now, climate change, not just drought, but also sea level rise, is probably one of the most severe existential threats that cities face. That's because 2/3 of the world's cities are coastal. Over 1.5 billion people live in low-lying, flood-prone coastal areas. Now, what you see here is a map that shows sea level rise in relation to changes in temperature. Climate scientists predict that we're going to see anywhere between 3 and 30 feet of sea level rise this side of the century. And it's not just low-island nation-states that are going to suffer, Kiribati, or the Maldives, or the Solomons, or Sri Lanka, and they will suffer. But also massive cities like Dhaka, like Hong Kong, like Shanghai, cities of 10, 20, 30 million people or more are literally going to be wiped off the face of this earth. They're going to have to adapt, or they're going to die. I want to take you also all the way over to the west, because this isn't just a problem in Asia or Africa or Latin America. This is a problem also in the West. This is Miami. Many of you know Miami is one of the wealthiest cities in the United States. It's also one of the most flood prone. That's been made painfully evident by natural disasters throughout 2017.